Well, good morning and welcome to Our Stories. Our guest today is Paul Foster. Paul, you grew up in Central Illinois, spent a lot of your early years in Decatur. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing here.
I think it was quite ordinary, but kind of exciting. I was born in Decatur, but my parents quickly moved to Vandalia. My dad worked for the power company then, and that's how my dad met my mother. She was the secretary there. So we moved to Vandalia maybe when I was 2, and then we moved to Centralia, and we moved back here when I was in the 6th grade, and I went to Mound School. I could walk to school because I only lived 2 blocks from there, and that was nice. And then I went to Woodrow Wilson Junior High, and then to Stephen Decatur. I graduated in '69. And from there, I attended Millikan. Millikan had an organ program, and I had taken organ lessons in high school. And my organ professor taught at Millikan. So I wanted to continue my studies in church music. They don't have that anymore, of course.
But you majored in organ there and studied that. And then after you graduated, you went to Boston to study with a renowned organ professional there.
I think so. I loved my time in Decatur, and when I went through Stephen Decatur, we had a fabulous music program, and that's when I really fell in love with music.
Yeah.
And that was a time, you recall, in the 60s, the church was everything. In a community like Decatur, it's where you spent your time as a kid. You were in the youth group. Today, kids don't spend their time in churches. They're in so many extracurricular activities, but your life really surrounded the church, and I became interested in the organ. And my organ professor at Millikan had a contact with an organ professor in Boston, and so I ended up at the School of Theology. It was a seminary, the first seminary actually in the Methodist Church. And I studied with this organist for 3 years and got a master's in sacred music program.
And then after you graduated from there, you tried making a living as an organist.
I had a fun job. You organists out there listening to this will know the name E. Power Biggs. My first church job was at a church whose organ, E. Power Biggs, who was a concert, he's the one that had a Bach revival that brought organ music back to being prominent in the 50s and 60s. He used this organ, where I was the organist, as an example of this is what you don't want your organ to sound like. And it was fun. I had a paid choir. I had inroads into the Boston Symphony Chorus. We got to sing in New York, and we sang out in Tanglewood. It was a magical time. I would say my first 10, 15 years out there were just absorbed with music, with the Boston Symphony Chorus. I was in the Handel and Haydn Society. It was magic. Boston was magic.
Music. Yeah.
I remember my first years there, I felt like I was living the kingdom now.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Then you found that it wasn't always so easy to make a living.
It became clear to me that you really had to be a superstar. Now, I was certainly no superstar, and you had to have several positions to try, and a lot of my friends did. They freelanced, and it's not really unlike, I think there are a lot of musicians here that play here, that perform there, and they make a living. But that would be harder to do in Boston, where the competition is so much more intense. And I eventually got out of church music, and I got a banking job, and it led from one position to another, and I ended up working for 30 years at Bank of America in Boston. I started there in 1987, and I retired in 2018, and that's when I moved back here.
Yeah.
In the fullness of time, I really stopped music altogether. I stopped singing. After I left my church job, I had paid singing jobs. In Boston, most churches have paid choirs. There
Right.
was no concept out there of a volunteer choir. And I was a paid soloist for many years. But finally, I gave that up. But I would say I did not touch a keyboard, a piano or organ my last 35 years in Boston.
Wow. Wow. Well, for somebody who loves music like you do, that's, must have been like being in the desert, huh? Okay. Anyway, 2018, you moved back to Decatur. But like you said, you got on a plane with a suitcase and moved here really not knowing anybody.
I knew some people at First Methodist Church because it's where I grew up, and some of the people that I grew up with were still there. You're right, I moved here. I wouldn't even say I moved here with a suitcase. I had maybe a backpack or something like that. I'd gotten rid of almost everything when I lived in Boston. And all I had, I brought a couple plants that I still have alive and brought some clothes. And my brother met me in Chicago. And we drove down here, and I decided I was going to live in my mother's house. And I remember waking up the next day thinking, oh, okay, today is, you know that horrible phrase, today is the first day of the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I woke up with the next morning.
Yeah.
My brother left back for Chicago, and I thought, oh, now what?
Yeah.
But that didn't last long.
All right. Yeah. So what kind of things have you become involved with? Because I know you told me you made a lot of connections here in Decatur since you've been back, so.
I think I've been extremely lucky. So many people have a church affiliation, and a lot of their group of comrades, shall we say, is part of that association. But I've really been lucky. I think I've got several church associations that have given me a real variety of friendships that I value. Of course, I started going back to the Methodist Church, and little by little, I tried to relearn some of my organ skills that I had lost touch with, and I met up with a group of pianists. It's a group called the Piano Club, and they welcomed me into their group. I decided to do some volunteering at the hospital because my mother had done it, and I worked in the surgery waiting room, and I became involved with Meals on Wheels, joined the Audubon Society. I started associating with master gardeners and matronaturalists, and in the fullness of time, I was able to establish a volunteer relationship with Rock Springs Conservation, which I love. I'm not a terrific birder, as they call them, but I love being involved with birds, and I'm a bird box monitor out at Sand Creek. And I got to do that through my association with the Audubon Society. So I would say I've been lucky because there were so many opportunities for me to get involved with community work that I did not solicit when I lived in Boston. In Boston, I simply worked and I came home, and here I just have sort of had a renaissance of feeling like my life has let me become involved in community organizations, which I absolutely love. And I started playing the organ again. I was organist for a while at St. John's Episcopal, and I will never, ever have the skills back that I had at one time. But it's a delight to sit down and make music again. I love it. I love all the opportunities that I've had here, and I'm not sure, if I had retired in Boston, I'm not sure I would have had the same kind of opportunities. Decatur is very welcoming if you want to give your time and your skills. I have the music outlets that I need, and Decatur has Milliken, a wonderful music program, a symphony. There's no end of concerts you can go to here, and even in the surrounding area. I was just telling someone the other day, I think it was a gift that I happened to have a place to come to and a desire and an openness in the community to be accepted into many different kinds of groups.
Sure. Well, it's really been interesting, Paul, to have you share with us what your upbringing was about, but also your time here of coming back into, you know, a place that you lived previously but hadn't lived for quite a while and came back to, and how it's been a really enriching part of life for you at this point, you know?
I think my story is a bit unusual. Not everyone would leave a place like Boston and come to a place like Decatur, but I choose my terms well. For me, it ended up being a renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
It allowed me to give something back that I hadn't really let myself experience.
Yeah.
I very much enjoyed being here. The various organizations that I'm in are all so meaningful and so community-oriented. I think Decatur's very lucky with the talented group of citizens that it has. Of course, there are problems, but what I've discovered is there are really pockets of concentrated talent
Yeah.
trying to make this a better community, and I'm really thrilled to be part of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for sharing with us this morning.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it.
I'm glad to be
Okay.
here.